All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are joining us from, welcome to our YouTube channel. And my name is Pranav Vyas. I am the International Education Housing Specialist at the International Education Office at Durham College. And today we will go through some quick information and some slides to help you learn more about living with a roommate as an international student. So let's dive right into it. Before we talk about how to live and what you need to do and what the whole situation is, let's get into the resources and toolkits that you have available from the International Education Office, our wonderful websites, and how to use these guides and toolkits. So I'm going to quickly share our housing website with you. So, when you look at our international Durham College International Education's housing page, you will get started with these testimonials and a bunch of tabs on your left. These tabs will have campus maps, visas and permits, which is a whole different conversation, tax information, again, nothing to be scared about, and housing, which is what we are discussing today. Um, so finding a place to live is a top priority for everybody who is in this workshop, whether you're a current international student or a new international student. In terms of resources that we provide, the best one and the first one to start with is the Housing Guide. Housing Guide is amalgamation of resources provided by all three institutions, educational institutions within the Durham region, and it provides a plethora of information and a uh, very valuable toolkits such as things to know if you're living on campus, links to go with if you're living on campus to pay, to learn about meal plans, to learn about sharing, to learn about fees themselves and how much it would cost you all while you're sitting in the comfort of your house. So the housing guide will not just tell you how to live at different residences, but how there are different types of living on and off campus. What are different categories in the off campus section as well? And here's one of the toolkits that you will use, starting with planning your budget, the platforms that you need to use for actually looking for places off campus, listings, contacts of the landlords, how to stay um, aware when it comes to scams, when it comes to people trying to get an advantage of you, or exploit you for your rent or under the pretense of a deposit. All of these will be discussed in detail, along with checklists that are available, average prices of groceries. I know this is a common concern for not just students, but their wards or their parents as well, that, you know, we're paying so much in international fees. How do we manage our grocery and budget costs? So these are the most recent data available as of last year. If you still need time or if you still need to research more, you're always welcome to reach out to me or anyone at the international office to understand costs about the current environment that you're in. Because as we know, there is a lot of uncertainty in the air. Red flags to be worried about, handling roommate conflicts. All of this is what we're going to go through in the slides today, in more in detail than the usual. So you will be able to save this. You will be able to request recording. As you can see, if you're already seeing this on YouTube, a bunch of students should have already accessed this. So let's go back in terms of our presentation. We've discussed the toolkits. We've discussed what toolkits are available and how to use them. The first one, in terms of the concern that comes for while looking for any kind of housing or any kind of roommate situation or accommodation, the first thing that comes to mind is the money, right? The budget conversation is something that is very important and critical to your living and standard of living in Canada as an international student. Excuse me. So let's face it, right? Rent is never cheap for someone who is looking at the perfect house or to rent or buy, for someone who's looking for a perfect apartment that they want to rent really close to the campus, and after doing everything, you realize the rent is just too high. So how do you make sure that if your budget a month for paying rent is $1,000, and the rent for the apartment is $1,000, not including utilities, not including other grocery expenses? How do you calculate your budget without losing your grocery budget, without losing your meals? Because come on, let's just admit the $1,000 for rent will not keep you fed. So let's dive into a realistic budget, right? Um, we are going to open an Excel sheet. So I'm going to share this Excel sheet with you as well. It's one of the tools that you can use in terms of creating an accessible budget. So we are going to start with this Excel sheet that I've already made. And you can, just to save time, you can also use the same Excel sheet with your own calculations, with your own information in there. All right. So here's what we have here. In terms of basic rent, we have our monthly rent amount, right? Let's make it $1,000, right? I'm going to get rid of all these costs for now. Utilities, right? Electricity, water, and heating. Before I dive into giving you this exact amount of water, heating costs, and electricity costs, I want you to understand that electricity bills and gas bills, which is called heating as well here, these bills come every month. Sometimes if you're in a lease agreement and you solely own the apartment or a condo or a basement with a separate water meter or separate electric meter, which is called a legal basement as well, a separate entrance. These accounts will be under your name unless agreed upon otherwise by the landlord. And these bills, before even they start, you need a bunch of deposit totaling up to, I want to say, $300 to $400, anywhere in between. This is refundable just to open the account. If you move, these accounts move. And I'm only talking strictly electricity and gas utility accounts. Everywhere, almost everywhere in the Durham region, at least, water billing is always under the landlord's name, which means you do pay your water bills, but the bills come under the landlord's name. They cannot be transferred. You cannot create an account for water billing unless you own a house. So as a tenant, you don't need to worry about the ownership of water billing, but you do have to pay the water bill. Electricity and gas bills come every month. Those deposits, once you create the account, after you move or if you close the account, those deposits are returned to you or applied to the next unpaid bill amount or the last bill amount. While electricity and gas bills come every month, water billing comes every 3 months, which usually is higher. And students who are looking at the first water bill usually get a bit of shock if they are not careful or if they're not anticipating this in their budget. So it's very important that we start off with this. So let's say you're living in a sharing apartment, or let's assume a worst possible scenario for a student who is living in Durham region, who is living a little away from the college, and in a neighborhood that has more utility costs. For example, sometimes some neighborhoods have older houses which will have older equipment, so your power ratings are low. Basically, your electricity utilization is more. It takes more to heat up the house. It takes more energy to heat up the stove. Or the refrigerator has lower ratings. So stuff like that comes into the account of your water billing. I'm sorry, your electricity billing. Um, on an average, based on my experience, I have seen students living in Durham region face electricity bills of, I would say, $40 to $50 a month, um, provided that they're living in a big house sharing, or they're living on their own. It can also be as low as $20 to $30 per person, or even lower if you are sharing the accommodation. So let's start with $20 for electricity. Gas, usually similar scenario, a higher deposit than the electric bills, but usually your gas billings fluctuates as winter comes closer and summer comes in. On an average, your annual monthly gas budget should be around, again, same as electricity, minimum $30 to $40 to maximum of 70 or $80, depending on the situation and the sharing that you're doing. So let's amount maximum budget of $120 for electricity and gas. So that would be 60 plus 60 plus water billing, which is left. So as I said, water billing comes every 3 months, right? This amount is usually higher. Let's say I'm talking $300, $400, but this is every quarter. So for 3 months, right? For 90 days. And depending on your situation, your water usage, if there are no leaks in the house, if you don't, you have to focus on this, right? If you look at water dripping, don't avoid that. Talk to the landlord. Tell them, hey, my water billing is going to come high, right? Call the water region of Durham. Call 211. I think it's 311. And you can call them and ask to be connected to the water billing department inside the service, within the service hours. Provide the water billing meter reading, and they will tell you the exact amount. They will ask for some identification, which you can definitely provide, but you don't need to also call the landlord if you're just asking about your home address's water billing and give them the reading, right? So let's say $100 maximum, right? So another $100, that gives us $220, right? To be safe. That's a good amount of budget. So $220 for all utilities, not including Wi-Fi, right? Monthly Wi-Fi cost should not be more than, and this is home internet, so it's usually shared. It could be zero because some landlords do provide Wi-Fi for free, or it could be anywhere ranging from $15 to $20 per person, right? So let's say let's keep $20 for home internet a month, right? Tenant insurance. Again, very, very important. Tenant insurance is something that helps students understand the liability part in Canada, right? As a tenant, you do not necessarily intentionally want to damage the property that you live in. No one wants to, right? But come on, you're living in a college, you're going to have parties, you're going to have birthday parties, right? You're going to have friends over because you're away from home. You need to celebrate harder. Some students do party a lot, leave a mess. Sometimes they are really nice and their friends leave a mess. They damage something, while intoxicated, or there is something completely outside of your control. For example, your basement's flooding, or your water tap's leaking, right? And it suddenly broke, and there's water in the kitchen. If there's water in the washroom, it can damage the floor. Again, these houses are made of wood, so you have to be very careful. And no amount of mopping or no amount of additional drying will help unless it's a professional cleaning, right? And those things cost, and those costs come up on the tenant side if the landlord does not provide enough support for it, saying, hey, I got it covered, which you don't want to do as long as, you have a good relationship with the landlord or you have prior consent. So tenant insurance can range from $30 monthly to, I mean, $300 a year. So I would say it would cost over little higher over the range of 20 to like lower 30s. So let's get on the average and make sure it's like $25, right? But this does cover, by paying this extra $25 on your budget, it costs the cost of, breakage of any landlord property, or even your laptop, your own personal equipment, your devices, your own property as a tenant, right? If your bicycle is stolen, if your garage is flooded, if you have a break-in, or if there is a fire in the house, right? All of those equipments needs to be covered by something that is not offered by the landlord's home insurance. A home insurance is different from a tenant insurance. A tenant insurance covers tenant's property, tenant's liabilities. For example, if you have guests over and they damage something, you're not going to spoil your relationship with the guest by saying, hey, you damaged something, you need to pay for it. You're going to go to the landlord and say, hey, I am responsible for it. I'm accountable for it. I'm not responsible for it, but someone did this damage. They were responsible for the the damage that has been done to your property, and I'm accountable for it, so I will cover it. That is the ideal way to go. But you don't want to pay $1,000 if someone, breaks a garage door, right? That's not your fault, and you shouldn't be in the situation. It sucks, but what helps is having a tenant insurance and making sure that you've done your due diligence in covering the liabilities as much as possible. This de-escalates your work. This de-escalates and lowers the amount of tasks that you do on top of, doing your groceries, cooking on your own, being a part of a heavy academic schedule, living in a new country, adjusting to life here, working part-time, right? So we want to make sure that all of this is covered. Again, last thing that I have included in this calculator is furnishing, right? The topmost expense of furnitures for tenants is their mattresses and their bed frames. And sometimes students usually do go for buying a dining table if they have a bigger house and they don't have furniture in there, or a sofa, but it is usually bought off the Facebook Marketplace or IKEA, or some relative or friend has donated it to them. Again, this can be zero, but it can range. Counting a bed frame, it can range from anywhere, from $100 to $300, $400 if you're looking at a bigger mattress or a queen mattress or a bed frame if you're living with a roommate or a partner or your spouse, right? So let's say this is one-time cost for over a year or more than a year. So per month, it would come up to, let's say, $10 if you just get a bed frame, right? And a mattress. So let's say $10 a month. Again, this is $100 one-time cost. So we're just calculating a yearly, based on yearly, how much it would cost if you keep a mattress or a bed for a year, would cost $10, but usually it would last longer, right? So again, first month rent and last month's rent, that's going to be the same again, $1,000. So we can just combine these two and call it another $2,000. Let's call it first and last month's rent. Last month's rent. Deposits. All right. So the initial rent payment, ideally, and at any standard scenario for leasing for students, would be payment of first month and last month. You can still have a lease that is month to month, but for financial and housing stability concerns for both tenant and the landlord, you need to have first and last month's rent paid, right? Upfront, which is I pay my last month's rent. So let's say for students who are arriving in May, who are going to enter into a 1-year lease, they're going to pay for May 2026 first month's rent, and then another May 2027's last month's rent, right? And then at the end of May, they will pay again for June 2026 and then pay monthly, um, so on, moving forward. If you're coming in fall 2027, you usually arrive a bit early. So let's say if you're arriving in August, you find something temporary, you start your lease on September, you pay your last month's rent, you pay your first and last month's rent starting September 2026 to September 2027, and then pay monthly, so on. Some landlords also asks for damage deposit or a key deposit. Okay. And again, this is mentioned in detail in the housing guide. However, deposits are a very sneaky way for landlords or even a realtor sometimes to um, get more money, right? It is always a good practice to make sure that this deposit is documented in the lease. It is provided as an additional amount on top of the lease agreement, first and last month's rent. So ideally, for one person, it should not be legally. It should not be more than the cost of $100. But um, it should not be, I'm sorry, it should not be more than the cost of the keys itself, right? But it has been a standard practice, and you can avoid this practice, and we will talk about this later, by, making sure that it is refundable and making sure that you discuss that this is documented and paid through bank transfers only. Do not pay cash. Do not pay checks. Well, checks are fine, but you don't have to pay posted checks for the whole year in terms of not giving $100, but make sure that these $100 are refunded to you at the end of the lease. And what are the terms and conditions? Sometimes landlords will say this is for damage and come up with damages that don't exist. Damages don't include wear and tear, right? So if you're living in a household, and door hinges, fridge doors, tap handles, right? Windows, right? What else? The stairs, right? Things that are day-to-day use and have normal wear and tear if someone would use them do not count under damage, right? Stove. If the knobs on the stove or the doorknobs are finicky or they are rusty, that doesn't count. Fixing that doesn't mean you're fixing damages, and you cannot withhold deposits under that category. So normal wear and tear doesn't count. Deposits or damage deposits are for something big, such as, hey, the fridge broken, right? The stove's not working, the thermostat's given up, or suddenly the heating is the heater is not working, the furnace is not working, stuff like that. So because you have tenant insurance, you can also prove that you have all the coverage. Usually it covers $1 million, depending on the policy and the code you get. You can argue against saying, we don't want to have a deposit, but tenants usually give in because they really like the house. But for students who are coming in 2026, it is a tenants market. There are a lot more landlords on the market in Durham region than there are students looking for rent. So you'll always have more options. Take your time. Okay. Furniture setups is, I'm going to put it at $0 because I know students will move and they would love to move their own stuff. If not, please have some friends call you and call them to come help, right? Other deposits, again, this is the same as keys and utility deposits, so I'm not gonna mention that right now. Oops, sorry. We've already counted for it, so we're going to keep this empty. Monthly income right now. So this is the money coming in. So we're going to write in minus and say you're earning part-time over a year, you're working part-time on minimum wage, you're earning, let's say, $500 or $600 every 2 weeks. That would come up to $1,200, right? So let's call it even 1,100, right? Depending on your first month and the market and the fact that you're working. So $1,100. We're going to make sure This is counted as minus, right, at the end of the day. So housing cost total. Let's see how much it's going to cost you at the end of the day. That was wrong, my mistake. So we're going to take the sum of all this. So you use auto sum. Oh, that's weird. Apologies. You make sure it's sum of, you apply a nice formula here. Right? So that's going to cost you $3,375, right? Again, we have counted $2,000 is first and last month's rent. So maybe we can exclude that. Actually, let me put that formula here. So we're going to add all these costs and then add a comma and then add all these costs. All right, so that we can remove the housing cost total. So again, this looks right. Sorry about that high total. We just included last month's rent as well, so that's fine. Affordability wise, your monthly housing cost is going to be $1,000, a little over 2,000 if you're not earning at all. But that's the budget that you need to start with if you are living on your own. This is the budget that comes in if you do not have a roommate, right? Housing ratio is something that you earn, and we're not going to get more into that because that's going to be a more complicated concept to explain right now, but you will be able to understand that once we get into the once we get ahead into the slides and presentation. So that would be the cost of housing divided by your income. So let's say divided by your income. Since right now it's in brackets, and we're just going to do 1375 divided by 1100, right? So if it's more than one, it's a little, you need to have more savings. If it's under one, you're doing good. However, it will be more than one in the first quarter of your living in Canada. So you have to account for that 25% overage, depending on the city that you live in. The region and the city, which is our next point, is the average cost of living in, is to calculate the average cost of living, right? You can use the guide as I just shown in the previous slide, that will have average costs. It will also have links to the recent data. So if you're looking at Whitby, if you're looking at Oshawa, if you're looking at Ajax, right? If you're looking at Pickering, these are all the cities in the Durham region that will have access to the bus pass straight to the campus, right? One bus is ideally what you want to have. Sometimes they have a couple buses to transit. It's also okay as long as your transit time to and from the college and your house is less than an hour. Okay, both ways. So make sure that you fill it up. Right now, we calculate it based on Oshawa, closest to the campus. As I said, excuse me, average rent is somewhere for a private bedroom with attached washroom. The private rent is $1,000, right? You can again go lower if it's lower than $1,000. Sometimes you get a good deal and your average monthly, including utilities, comes up to $1,000, which is amazing. Right? So let's say if you are living in a shared environment, right? You have a roommate, or you have a partner who is also a student, right? Your full rent for let's say an apartment is $1,200, right? Or a basement, right, is $1,200, right? Two people are sharing, individual share, let's say based on whatever. The reason I'm not just put it on its own is because I want you to understand that these sharing, not all the time, these sharings are 50%, right? It's not 50-50 all the time. So you can go with the monthly living of $1,200. With two people, you end up going to $600. That definitely brings your monthly cost down. Some students even share more than two people if it's a big room, bigger house. Let's say if it's a two-bedroom house or an apartment or a basement, and three students are living in it. And again, you don't want to overcrowd the place as well. If it's a two-bedroom basement or two-bedroom apartment, more than living people three I think more than three people is crowding, so you need to make sure you're aware if the place is getting crowded. You need a good living space. Remember, just because you're saving space and time and money does not mean that that's going to be reliable, right? You will live in a situation where you will be sharing a washroom, you will be sharing kitchen spaces, you will be sharing a fridge, right? You will be sharing an electric stove. So habits, the need to clean, the definition of clean for everybody is different. And we'll dive into that later and how to avoid that later. So total monthly cost option one cost, it was $1,000. With the roommate ended up being $600, right? And you saved or around a $400 worth of money in rent, right? So this is very important. This calculation actually shows you how you can save money by not compromising your living situation and still, have the opportunity to make more friends. So this is the budget calculation that you should go through after you, as soon as you plan to come to Canada after you receive your study permit approval. Let's go back to our budget calculation slides. There we go. Thank you for diving into that maths problem for me. But again, I know budgeting can be hard for everybody. Some students are just coming out of high school. Some of you who are looking at this workshop right now probably haven't worked in your home countries and probably are, hesitant about going to a bank, right? All of this can add up. It can, lead to a bit of stress, but we're here to support you. You don't need to be afraid. You need to be confident. As soon as you have some financial control, you will have more control over life. You will have more control over your situation, and that leads to lower stress, happier life, and more fun on campus always. Let's move ahead. Now that we understand that having a roommate is beneficial, who do you want to be your roommate, right? And that's where the conversation starts. A roommate conversation is very important. You want your friend to be your roommate? Definitely, it's easy to talk to. You know him, or you know him, her, or them, and then you know whether they are in the same schedule, whether they are going to be your classmates. So sometimes it can be helpful, sometimes it cannot. How can it not? From what I have observed, relationships do sour when they are confined to close quarters, which means if you have a really good friend outside of your living space and you always meet in your classrooms, that does not mean you can be good roommates. To have a good roommate, it is important to have a good roommate contract, right? Because you want someone who abides not just by the word, but by their text, by their written signature. You want not a legal contract, but at least an understanding or an agreement between you guys. Make sure, so that if push comes to shove and there are costs and expenses that come down on the house from the landlord, or rent increases, right? Which is rare if you don't have if you have a lease agreement. You can get into a lot of conflict with your roommate and spoil relationship. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you are very proactive from the beginning. You are very strict on who you want to live with, right? While you don't want to be rude, you also want to be straightforward with person that you're living with. Hey, this is what I mean by clean. This is how I want my living space to look like, right? If there's a shared hall, we both share the responsibility for cleaning it at least once a week, allowing our schedules align, right? If you are cooking together, you want your groceries to be divided equally. you want to have some form of application or some form of um, budget calculation again to make sure your monthly expenses are cleared at the end of every month, right? So for example, if you're living with me, and I am, bringing groceries, sometimes you are bringing groceries, we are all cooking together. We want to make sure that the costs are considered in an application or are written down with the receipts, and we want those costs to be cleared at the end of the month. So if I owe you money for those groceries, I pay you. You do not want to start the practice of, you know what, I paid you this much, you paid for my utility bill, let's call it even. No. You want to make sure that those transactions are recorded. You want to understand how to pay, how not to pay, where does it cost, how does it cost, how does the receipt looks like. Maybe there are more ways to do better affordable groceries. Do you like the same product? Are you doing groceries every other day? How can you make sure you buy in bulk and reduce your costs by making less, having less wastage? Are you spending on cleaning supplies? Are you using those cleaning supplies efficiently? All of these are part of the roommate conversations, because definitions differ with people, right? For siblings, sometimes, and I use this example often, for me and my younger brother, definition of clean is different, right? We would look at the same space and say, one would say, hey, this is clean, looks fine. And one would say, no, you know what? A little Monica, um, you know, Monicafication is needed, is what a Friends fan would say. But someone like that would say, a little more cleaning is there, a little more dusting is required, a little more vacuuming is required. We need to, maybe the air doesn't feel so good, it's so dusty, maybe we'll get a humidifier. You can tell who's the which one is which. I'm not going to say which one am I, but basically that's what my point is. You don't want to make sure you don't want to be in a situation where there are uncertainty or not no clarities on different items, right? That conversation in the beginning of signing a lease or finding that house roommate with you is very important. Some people avoid the conversation at all, and just pay for it. While some people have that luxury, I don't want you to do that, or I don't want you to avoid that conversation, because that is a very, very good opportunity to grow. One, understand people, meet with different people around the world, different mentalities around the world. World is a big place, right? Living with different people gives you more ideas. You learn a lot, right? A part of adulting does come from these roommate conversations. You understand people's feeling, and sometimes end up with lifelong friends, lifelong relationships, right? Not just roommates, but life partners. So it is a very, very important conversation to have. And one of the tools that we provide is the roommate questionnaire that I'm going to share right now with you. The roommate questionnaire is something that allows you to go through a list of questionnaires, a list of questions that can help you with everything in terms of the roommate conversation. So let's say if you're going through a lease, sorry about that, I'm just adjusting the screens. Let's say if you're going to enter a lease, right? You find a house, you're going house hunting with your friends, which is an amazing experience, by the way. Your realtor says, this is a good place, it fits your budget, everything is nice. What do you do now? You refer to the roommate questionnaire, right? Even though your friend's nice, everything is fine. If you both really like the house, do not right away go into the conversation of, I'm gonna pick that room, I'm gonna pick that room, and then you fight, and then no one gets the house. At the end of the day, realize someone else got the house. You don't want to go into that conversation right away. You want to agree on things first, right? So the roommate content will go through roommate questionnaire, I'm sorry, will go through how to go through these conversation, how to go through these talks, right? You can start by writing your names, your status, how long, you want to live together, how long, where do you want to live together, what's your commute preference, right? Do you both want to take the same commute? You're taking the bus, one of them is not taking the bus. So, you're traveling by Uber, you have your own car if you're, multimillionaire. Um, what time you are usually at home. Again, now you're going into the crust of the conversation. This is where conflicts arise, right? If I'm living with a roommate and we both have the same classrooms, we both have the same timetable, we both need to leave the house at the same time. We both need to get the same bus, catch the same bus at the same time at the same bus stop. You need to think of your morning routine, right? You don't want to open the refrigerator door at the same time. You don't want to crowd the stove or crowd the washroom, as a matter of fact. And you need to, decide on who goes first, how long, does it usually take for you to be at home if there are other tasks, right? If someone is at home most of the time, you want to avoid overcrowding, not to avoid conversation, but actually to give people their own space, right? And again, you don't need to negotiate. Things do change, but you do need to understand, if it's going to be an escalating situation of conflicts. If two people in the same routine are living for a longer time in close quarters, there are high chances of, having a little bit of disagreement, right? There's always been a little bit of disagreements, which is fine as long as you work towards the resolution proactively, right? You think of scenarios. If you're like me, you always think of the worst possible scenario, right? Which usually never happens, and you stress out for nothing, but it helps you prepare. Um, if one of you smokes, right? How's your tolerance on smokes? Alcohol use, recreational use, cannabis use. Again, cannabis is legal in this country, and that means some people who are not, very who are very sensitive to smoke or these kind of substances can make sure that they do not live with people who are not or who love to smoke. Overnight guests, right? You want to have a little bit of privacy if you are living in the same room or have a roommate. Maximum frequency, right? How often do your guests come? Are they using a lot of resources? Are they, driving up the utility cost? First year or first 6 months at least, these things need to be really looked after. You need to be really, really micromanaging these stuff. Um, are you comfortable with mixed gender roommates living in a house with mixed gender social lifestyle? Are you comfortable with late night parties? Very important if you're a light sleeper, right? Your noise tolerance is important. If you should be able to get good sleep, right? And you need to be in an environment and you need to be in an environment. Wow, that's a tongue twister. That gets you good sleep. Cleanliness, again, as I mentioned, I'm not going to discuss who amongst our siblings or my friends living with me are more cleaner or define cleanliness differently, but you need to agree on what means clean, right? So share a picture, let's say a picture of a kitchen or your own kitchen that you're going to use after a week, and show that. um, does it look clean to someone? Ask them what would they do, right? It's a very, very light conversation. It doesn't have to be formal. Frequency for cleaning shared spaces. A standard brooming and mopping is required. So make sure that that frequency is set, and it is usually easier to schedule it on, your Google Calendar so that you don't have to remind everybody once a while. Preferred cleaning systems, who does what first, right? If some weeks works better for someone, make sure they only get alternate weeks, clean as you go, or do you want to make sure you have rotating schedules, right? Who buys these supplies? Who does the grocery runs? Pets, very important. Allergy concerns, very, very important. Food arrangements, kitchen use. Again, I'm not going to go into much detail into it, but this does go into the nitty-gritty, the crust of exactly how will you be living with your roommate, right? Safety and comfort, also very important. Conflict resolutions, right? What if you end up at a rock and hard place? You're stuck, right? Neither of you are agreeing on the same thing. You don't think it's a good, environment to live in. You're in a conflict. You want to resolve that conflict. How do you reach out? And how do you, discuss on resolving those conflicts? These things might seem very, very unimportant right now, but over time, in a country that you never lived in, after a year, after 3 seasons, these will make sense. So trust us. Again, shared house rules. If you have additional notes, you can do that. You can write them down here, noise levels, all of that. All right. So this roommate questionnaire is a very important tool and is available on our housing website soon as well. So let's dive ahead into our next conversation. We've already gone through the roommate questionnaire. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. My apologies. There we go. All righty. Right now. So setting a budget with a roommate. Budget for housing can be significantly reduced with a compatible roommate sharing expenses while maintaining privacy. As I've discussed, when we went through the budget calculation, the amount of money that you pay or expenses that are covered for solid rent and utilities get divided very easily, right? If you have a comfortable, compatible roommate, and make sure that you also maintain your privacy. We already discussed roommate conflicts and conflict resolution, tenant insurance. Amazing. So let's dive into this. Tenant insurance is something that is very important in terms of covering these liabilities. It is very important that you understand that houses are made of, I want to say, a material that invites liabilities, which is wood. So, if you're mopping with a lot of water, it does get damp, right? The floor will start to creak. And then, sometimes if you're using a lot of damaging equipment, sometimes people drop stuff like weights in their room, or they are walking too loudly over the carpet, or they have tore the carpet. Anything could happen, right? Even if you're living in a temporary accommodation, let's say an Airbnb for a month, right? Their costs include insurance. This insurance is very, very important in Canada because costs of repairs are high, almost as high as your rent, right? So imagine this, you're paying tenant insurance to cover expenses that would amount to as much as or even as higher than your rent amount, right? You do get discounted student rates. That way, liabilities gets transferred to at a lower cost to a third party, which is the tenant insurance provider, right? So you have to tick mark on how to find that tenant, how to cover those liabilities like water, flooding, tornadoes. We don't get tornadoes on this side, so you don't need to get coverage for that. Earthquakes. There's been some unfortunate news over the other side of the country, but you're safe in Ontario. We're away from the fault lines. But all of these coverages are important if you really like the house and you're looking to stay at the house for at least the duration of your course or a couple years after that, right? So if you're living in a place for 3 years, you might have pests. You need pest control, like if you have raccoons, if you have bed bugs for some reason because because the previous tenant didn't clean the house. All of those pest control requires expenses and can come out of the tenant's pocket if it's not covered by insurance. So you make sure that if there is any kind of this cost if there is a theft or a break-in in your house, you should understand through your tenant insurance companies, which will be listed again in the housing guide, or you can refer to our housing workshop recording on our YouTube channel as well. Make sure that these things are important and these things are under your radar when it comes to getting a tenant insurance policy, which is also a good thing if you're looking, to get some more some form of identification. Let's say you're getting a license for the first time, you don't have your passport, you can use a tenant insurance policy to show that you are a resident and you live there and you have some proof of living as an address proof. How long should your tenant insurance be? Right? Your tenant insurance should be as long as your lease agreement, especially when it comes to ending, going towards the end of your lease. You want to give yourself a little higher than your lease ending time because you want to have enough time and coverage in case things come up after you move. You also want to be insured and covered while you're moving, right? Sometimes students are moving heavy furniture and the door gets broken, or they hit something, or there's a hole in the wall. Again, walls are made of wood here, houses are made of wood. So you want to be careful that you have enough coverage right when you need it, right? So that's why it's very important to have tenant insurance. Off the top of my mind, again, not recommended by college. Durham College are the tenant insurance companies like Sonnet. You can also go through Student VIP, which is also our health insurance provider, to get more discounted rates. Thank you so much for staying with me for almost a little under an hour. We cannot wait to see you on campus and invite you into a future of possibilities. For any questions and concerns about housing, about ISAs or immigration, about your academic schedules, or just about being homesick and talking to someone, contact us. We have much more available at the international office, and we want to make sure that you feel at home and that you feel like you belong here at Durham College. Do not forget to like this video if you found something resourceful. Do not forget to subscribe, because we do provide content based on student needs, and comment if you can about what more would you like to cover, what more would you like to know about. Are there any resources that we missed? Do you need any of the resources that we discussed, apart from the links that we post in the description? And if there is anything else that we can do to have our wonderful students thrive, graduate with flying colors, and make a name for themselves and Durham College after graduating. Thank you so much, and have a good day, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. See you soon.